In this episode of the Separation Guide podcast, we delve into the complexities of property division during separation and divorce. A family home is often our greatest asset, yet knowing how to maximise its worth while navigating the end of a relationship can feel confusing and overwhelming, as well as being peppered with high emotion. To help explore the facts and innovative solutions for buying and selling, we're joined by Evan Thornley, co-founder and CEO of Longview, and Jules Hewitt, Head of Customer Success at Agent Select. With a broad expert offering in real estate, Longview helps people who are trying to stay in the family home or buy the next home, as well as providing services in home equity, fund management, property management, and buyer's advocacy. Evan is passionate about supporting newly single parents facing renting challenges post-separation, after hearing from countless separating homeowners who don't want to sell and are worried about the prospect of being a long-term renter in Australia because of the high competition and lack of security. Jules brings more than 15 years' experience in customer service and a genuine empathy for people navigating the sale of a home. Together, we discuss innovative options for selling and buying properties, how to find the best agent for your needs, the value in retaining an expert to understand and negotiate the sales process, how to stay on the capital growth train during a separation, and the pros and cons of purchasing a rental investment property. It's a potent reminder that even for those of us that consider ourselves somewhat well-informed or commercially savvy, there is great benefit in seeking expert advice and guidance when it comes to making property decisions. There are lots of gems in this chat for how to navigate property-related decisions during a separation, but also for anyone wanting to ensure our property will support us financially and emotionally over the long haul. I started by asking Evan and Jules if they've ever observed people's decisions to stay or leave a relationship being influenced by the current state of property prices and cost of living pressures.
I'm reading material in the paper that says that more people are choosing to stay together because the consequences of not are pretty dire. I mean, the consequences definitely are difficult, right? I mean, obviously, many people here are going through a divorce. I've gone through a divorce. I've been through one myself. I mean, it's difficult in every possible way, emotionally, but also financially. You know, it often leaves people, both partners, in a much more difficult situation in terms of their home and particularly their mortgage, because you've then got single income households, or in some cases, not much income at all in a household, and half the equity you had before. And so your position in the home ownership market is dramatically more difficult than it is as an existing couple with the combined equity and the combined incomes. That puts almost everybody, almost all the time, in a difficult position when they ultimately do need to separate. So then it can be very hard for people to get back in the housing market if they have to sell the family home and aren't in a position to, you need two family homes all of a sudden. You need twice as many family homes with half as much financial capacity for each. And that equation is difficult for people. So I can imagine that is making people think twice about separating, and perhaps that's a good thing in some ways. We should always think hard about that. It's never an easy thing to do, but the reality of the housing market is making that a more and more consequential decision, I guess.
Absolutely, Jules. Have you seen any evidence of this from clients that perhaps they've come to you thinking about selling, and then when they learn further information, they reconsider because it feels like too big a jump?
Yes, we do see a lot of that with our clients. Often when they come to us, however, the decision has been made already. So they've gone through this, they've worked through the steps, they've had the conversation of how it may look financially for both parties, but ultimately when the clients reach us, they're at that stage where they've made that final decision to sell their home. So they've gone through those tough conversations. And I guess our role here is to just navigate them through those decisions the best that we can, inform them of all the costs involved, in selling the home and make sure we get the best outcome for both parties. It's really stressful, particularly when there's kids involved, not knowing where you're going to go to next and if either party can afford to go back into the market. And we're certainly not here to pressure anyone to sell a home. I mean, we're here to support them through whatever decision they make. But again, ultimately, if that is the decision, we will support them the best we can. We will lay out all the costs for them and help them navigate and make the right choice for both parties.
So you've both acknowledged that this is a high emotional time for anyone who's going through a separation. When we are overwhelmed emotionally, we can shut down cognitively. What do you think some of the biggest mistakes people make very early on in this process? They've decided to separate. Where do they go wrong in the early piece?
Sometimes rash, quick, emotional decisions are made. They decide to just select an agent who they've heard of or seen down the street. They believe all that they've been told about the property value, what they're going to get, how quickly it'll sell, and this is amazing, and all those stories that you hear. I mean, we work with agents, so I'm certainly not here to discourage agents, and the ones we work with, we certainly have a great relationship with. But sometimes when the emotion is in there, and one party, if they're not an amicable split, they just want to get out, and they just make a quick decision, and they just decide, we're going with this person because they sold next door and they've told us we'll sell in 3 months and this is what we'll get. That's what I hear a lot. And often when those clients come to us at that point, we find their properties have been on the market for quite some time because the decision has been made rashly and emotionally. So we would always suggest to try to take a step back if possible. It's a stressful time. And if you've decided to sell your home, as hard as it sounds, perhaps look at it as a transaction. Do your due diligence and be as informed as you can when researching, agents and the market, I guess.
And Evan, what do you wish more couples knew before they made the first move here?
Oh, look, probably partly because it's the nature of the real estate industry. Everybody's focused on the sale decision. Actually, and it's obviously important when you do sell a property that you do it well, and that's what Jules and her team ensure happens. But the more important property decisions themselves are actually your buying decisions, right? If you buy the wrong property, that has terrible consequences. The difference between buying a good property and a bad property from a capital growth point of view is easily $500,000 over the next 10 years, usually more than that. So buying decisions are incredibly consequential property decisions, and people aren't aware of that. They think that, the property market will go up and therefore my property will go up. Well, some do and some don't. And then obviously understanding in the context of a separation, even understanding, well, what will my purchasing power be? I mean, we've sold the home, we're going to divvy up minus paying off the mortgage, the equity that's behind it. Then what does the world look like? And what mortgage capability will I have? Plus, how much equity will I come out with? And therefore, what budget am I going to realistically have to purchase? And what does that really look like? And what do they say in carpentry? Measure twice, cut once.
Yes.
I think it would be very, very much preferable, difficult as it is, given the emotional state and often the urgency in some cases of just wanting to move past that difficult emotional state, to really plan out the housing outcomes for both partners before putting the property on the market. I mean, once the thing's on the market and you're in the middle of a campaign and there's pressure to decide where you're going to sell and when you aren't, and if you're not, what you're going to do, that's stressful enough. I think it's important that both partners have an understanding of what they're going to come out of that process with and what will be their next set of housing decisions. Now, in our business, and we don't sell property, but we certainly help people buy property. And our strong preference in a normal situation is wherever possible to buy first and sell second. That sounds counterintuitive, but the really important thing is that you buy the right property, and you should be patient and not under time pressure when you're trying to make a purchase decision. Now, of course, in order to do that, you either need to buy on a long settlement and then sell on a short settlement, or you need to arrange some bridging finance in most cases. So it's more complex to buy before you sell, but it makes it much more likely you're going to make the really important decision, which is the purchase decision, correctly. But then you need to not be pressured to sell. So it's tricky. But obviously that's massively more complicated in the situation of a separation. And so people at least need to plan how they're thinking about the buying before they go into the selling, and understand the consequences of what their budget might be, and therefore, For example, where realistically will they be able to afford a property that will at least meet their basic needs with the budget they're likely to have? So you really want to think all that stuff through so that by the time you're executing the decision to sell, it's part of a complete set of housing decisions. You're executing a decision to sell so that you can execute the decisions to buy, and you know what both of those decisions look like right now, as opposed to, well, sell and then start thinking about what the buying opportunities and challenges are going to be. You want to know all that stuff in advance.
I've actually seen a lot of couples that I've worked with psychologically over the years who have not got anywhere near close to thinking about buying when they're in the process of separating. As you both have recognised, they're thinking about what they do with this one precious asset, and often in a state of fear, and as you both also acknowledged, a desire to get out, to not be in each other's space. Quick decisions are made with the view of renting. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the rental market, neither of which you work direct? Well, you do, Evan, don't you? You do work very much in the rental market. Yeah. So for those couples who are thinking, I hear Evan's advice. He's saying, put your energy and focus on what you're going to buy. But if my mindset's not there yet and I'm thinking about renting as a transitional step, what do I need to consider?
And this is the thing. And I think, people often, obviously, they might physically wish to be separated as quickly as possible, get that out of the way. They also want to reach a financial settlement as quickly as possible. It's just such a difficult emotional journey. And in some ways, when it's difficult and it's fearful, they just want to have cash, right? Like let's sell the home, I'll put the money in the bank, and then I'll work out what to do next. So I've got the physical separation, I've got the financial separation, and I've got my kind of nest egg, whatever it is that's left, in the bank. And I can understand why people want to get to that place. That's a place of safety, or it feels like a place of safety. But then, unfortunately, they discover what an unpleasant place the rental market is. Look, we have a phrase to describe everything we try and deliver for all of our clients, which is dignified, secure housing. And unfortunately, the private rental market is definitely never secure and often not dignified. It's often quite a shock for people who've perhaps been homeowners for most of their adult lives, since perhaps they were, students at uni or something as renters, going back into the rental market, being in competition for properties, having some property manager asking you very personal questions about yourself, coming from someone who's perhaps much lesser educated and much less familiar with many things in the world than you are, and you feel like they're assessing you as a human being against others for a rental property. It's a very undignified experience. And, there's so much about the private rental market that is undignified. We're trying to work to make that change fundamentally, and part of what Longview is trying to do is to create long-term secure rentals for people. Part of the challenge in the rental market is not just finding a home that you can afford, and then you need to move quickly before you find a home you actually want. Well, then there's lots of other people who potentially want it too, so you have to be in a position where you can move quite quickly, where you've got all your documents in order, where you look like a really good applicant. And some of us aren't at our best as we're going through a divorce, and yet we need to do that. So it's a difficult process, and I think people underestimate. People who've lived in their own home for a long time sort of go, it's okay. Look, I'll rent for a while and then I'll go back to being a homeowner. I think they forget how difficult renting is, and the process and the problems. And then the question will be, if they haven't really given thought to it, well, how realistic will it be for me to get back into home ownership? Am I potentially staring down the barrel of being a long-term renter?
And Jules, what are your thoughts? I know you're in the business of helping people find an agent to sell. Have you got thoughts on the rental market? Is it conversation that you have with potential clients who are looking at their next steps?
Definitely, and particularly in clients who are going through a separation. Sometimes the option to buy just isn't there yet. Also not knowing if family is involved, children are involved, where are both parties going to go to? That comes up quite often. One of the partner might be moving interstate or into another suburb. So there's all of that emotional of the separation. And then attached to that is, well, where am I going to live? Will I still be able to afford to be close to the children's schooling or kinder or high school? And perhaps not. Maybe where they live now, they can't afford to buy there now, or so they maybe can't afford to rent there either. So this conversation does come up quite a bit. Luckily for us, we have a great network of agents that we do work with. So when we hear that in our conversations, we certainly raise that on early in the piece with the agents with respect. And we try to support either party if the decision to rent, and maybe it isn't, but if the decision is that they just financially or emotionally can't consider buying anything back into the market right now, they're going to rent for 6 or 12 months, we try to help them with that part of it as well. So we start to look for affordable rental properties for them. I might send them a link or two to some properties that might suit what they want. So we do try to help navigate them through that, but that comes up quite a bit. Sometimes financial independence comes in a lot. One party might be more financially secure than the other. They haven't split the assets yet. They don't know what that's going to look like, but they do want to get out of the home and start afresh, particularly if there's a third party involved in the separation and somebody's already moved on into another home. So all of these stories come up. So we just try to support whatever their decision is, whether it is rental, we can support them in that as well as the sale of the home. But there's certainly no pressure. We're just here to, navigate them through that process, I guess, the best we can.
So let's talk about, this is in your wheelhouse, Jules. What are some of the factors that people should be considering when they're looking to speak to a real estate agent to sell their house?
You'd need to really look for an agent that obviously knows the market and where you are. So you're wanting to find somebody that knows the area in the market that where you are. So we do the research. So our role is to actually do the research and to, I guess, for want of a better term, vet those agents. Try to connect the right agent with the right client, the right vendor. And sometimes the top agent in the area might not be the right person for this situation. You might need somebody who's, you'll need someone empathetic, patient, supportive, not just putting the hard sale on from day one. So it's really important when you are going through a separation. I always just say to my clients, just take, step back, ask as many questions as you want. No question's a silly question. Ask them about their experience in the market, comparable sales. Have they sold many divorce homes? Have they supported people through separations before? Just to try to build a connection, because this is going to be an emotional journey for them. And they need to make sure they're working with someone that they feel comfortable with.
I think it's really valuable to have a professional advisor like Jules and her team doing that. We actually help our clients sell properties too by picking an agent, but they're only the rental properties, not the family homes. But for all the same reasons, and it's all the more so important with the family home, the real estate sales industry works the way it works because that's how it makes money. But, there's all sorts of tricks, and I think many of us are aware of them, and having someone like Jules's team help you not get those tricks played on you at the worst possible time in life. So obviously many agents will tell you they'll get more for your home than in reality they will, because they're trying to get the business. The day after you've signed the listing contract, they'll spend their whole time doing what's called vendor management, which is a polite way of then telling you how much less you are going to get for the home than what they told you 5 minutes before when they sold you the property, and trying to put you under pressure to sell and to accept a lower price. Mm-hmm. I suspect that for some agents, knowing that someone's going through a divorce and therefore pretty much is going to have to take whatever price they can get, that would make some of them lick their lips and go, oh, this is fantastic. Here's a client who's not going to hang out for the best price. They're just going to be pressured into doing it. So I think it's really important at that time that people have a professional advisor who knows all those tricks and knows how those agents are going to behave and can give you honest, steady advice through what is a challenging process at the best of times.
And Evan, beyond a real estate agent in the process of selling, what are some other professionals that people might want to tap into? Mortgage brokers, you've talked about property managers, legal advisors. Who else do I need to speak to make an informed decision?
I do think it's important to be thinking about what you're going to do next on the buy side, and to potentially have really thought ahead about what you're going to do and what you can afford and what that might get you. So, you may also want to be talking to a buyer's advisor at that time. That's not in the sense a critical part of the sales process per se, but it's a critical part of thinking through what happens next, preferably before the sale. And indeed, if you can do these two things together and you could already be working on a purchase with a buying advisor, then that gives you more time in market and more of a chance of making sure you buy the right home by the time the settlement of your family home comes through. I think thinking about whether you might, for example, want to have a longer settlement on the family home to give you time to make the changes and time potentially, hopefully, to buy another property, or even just enough time to make sure that the rental that you choose is going to work for you, is probably one of the things you want to think about in advance.
What do you think the best thing we can do? Because there'll be people listening to this who your advice and insights make sense to, they can make sense of, and then they might be thinking, I don't think my partner my ex-partner that I'm separating from will see things in the same way that I do. So we've got two different people, as we've acknowledged. There's often fear, there's power struggles, there's power imbalances. And often I think it's difficult for us to come to a place of agreement about how we move forward. Are we looking to buy two separate properties? Is that even a discussion that we need to have together?
When some of us are going through a divorce, there's not a lot we can agree on, right? So even agreeing on which sales agent, but you've got your mate and I've got my friend and I trust them and you trust them. And then, you've got to agree on the sale price, right? And what you will accept and what you won't accept. Assuming, both parties are on title and both are party to a sale. So just those processes of selecting an agent and of ultimately making a decision about if there's been an offer at a certain price, which is probably not what either of you would have preferred, but do you take it or don't you? So unfortunately, you're chained to each other at least through those processes, I think, regardless.
What about the individuals who, we've talked about them, they just want to move quickly and then they want to think about this down the track and they have had very little experience. As you say, they may never have bought a property before except for this family home, could be decades ago. So they're kind of green in this space and now on their own navigating a world that's really quite unfamiliar to them. What do they need to consider if really they haven't been buying and selling houses all their lives?
There are great support out there. There are buyers agents out there who can really support you and guide you through this process and, even advise you on what to look out for. Our group here, we are also there to really, when they're very green, we support them with conveyancers and solicitors, so just to help them with those sorts of questions. So we have a great team of conveyancers and solicitors just at hand that we can just have them email a list of questions to our clients of what to look out for when buying property. And each state is different as well. So we can support them in that. Doing research on the market yourselves even, there's great resources out there, realestate.com. You can just have a look around and there's great tips on there as well. But I think it's really good to start with groups like buyers agents who can support you in what next and what to look out for when buying property.
Yeah, and mortgage brokers as part of that too.
Of course, yeah.
You really want to meet with a mortgage broker so that you can get a sense of how much money you're likely to be able to borrow, because then you'll have a sense, and hopefully you've got a reasonable idea of what you're going to sell for and then what your share of the equity will be coming out of the sale. So then you'll know how much equity you have and what your borrowing capacity is likely to be. And so then you know what your budget is going to be roughly. And then you can start thinking about, well, what does that mean? Where will we be able to live? What will we be able to afford? Until you've got a reasonable idea of what your budget's going to be, you can't even think about the next housing decision in any meaningful way. So, and then potentially you get a buyer's advisor to help you because, obviously what you think you can afford, and then you have the opposite problem of whilst the sales agent has lied to the vendor that they're going to get them more money, they've then lied to you and advertised it for less money, right? So they're overquoting to the seller and underquoting to the market. And so even what you think you're going to be able to buy, you've got a budget of 1.3 and there's a few properties out there that are 1.2 to 1.3. And so you're looking at them and lo and behold, you show up at the auctions and find out they're on for 1.4 and 1.5 and 1.6. So again, I think professional advice through this process. And the one thing I would say is that sales agents are not your professional advice. You either get an advisor like Jules and her team to help you manage the sales agent, or you get buyer's advisors on the buy side to help you manage that process, and mortgage brokers. So vendor advocates or vendor advisors like Julie and her team are there to advise you. Buying advisors and buying advocates are there to advise you. Mortgage brokers are there to advise you. Sales agents are there to close a deal. And they don't much care whether it's at your preferred price or the buyer's preferred price. So long as they can get a deal, they'll take the deal, take their commission and move on. I'm sorry, I'm very cynical, but, we do this for a living on the other side of sales agents all day long, and that's what's necessary for them to make a living, but they're not the place for unbiased advice.
I do agree with Evan to a point, and that is exactly what we are here to do, to give advice during that process. We've been doing this for many years. I've been doing this for many years, working with agents. You can pretty quickly get a feel for those agents that are going to do the wrong thing by client, and we certainly don't put them there.
And I'm sorry, I've slandered a whole profession there. Really only about half the profession that I meant to slander. There are very good people and very decent, hardworking, ethical people in real estate sales, and I don't want you to think otherwise. That's really my point. Jules and her team know who those people are and who they aren't.
You're exactly right. There are those people, and that's what we do. And we would certainly never navigate anyone towards somebody we felt that was going to do that, because it's not the best outcome for anybody. And that's what we're ultimately here to do, is get the best outcome for all parties and take away some of that stress during what is really a stressful time. And just to add to other things to consider, which we do hear quite often, is people are quite shocked to know what marketing fees are and how much they add up. Often we hear that quite a bit. They'll call and say, our marketing fees are, $3,000, $4,000, $6,000 sometimes just to put my property on market. And that's quite a lot of money, for some people. So that's quite a shock. So I would also like to, advise people to consider those costs as well. You might need staging or maintenance on the property. So these are the other things just through the process. Just consider there might be extra costs that come along the way. But marketing fees has been one that people do bring up quite a bit. So we have to sort of talk through them with that.
When you're in the process of separation, divorce and moving home, it can feel very much peppered with loss. Do either of you have thoughts on how we can shift our mindset towards one of opportunity and new beginnings when the unknown lies ahead for us in a real estate sense? As you said, we might be moving into a rental home we haven't rented since we were at uni. We might be downsizing from a large family home to a much smaller property. And so this sense of letting go of what I thought I had and what I thought I valued, and finding a way to value the next step.
Yeah, Sabina, I've personally owned properties at every end of the property market. I've been out looking at $10 and $20 million homes, and I've been looking at $500,000 homes. And there are good properties at every price point. Okay. And there are surprisingly horrible properties at every price point. So I think the first thing is not to, you're probably going to be more likely than not moving down in price point. That doesn't mean that you can't find a home that you love. You might have to change the way you look at it, but the process of buying a home doesn't change. You want to look at 50 properties and find the one that really speaks to you as your future home, not rush into the process. Buying a home is the last thing you should do in a hurry under pressure and time if you can avoid that. Because the difference between buying the right home and the wrong home, firstly, is it really going to work for you and your family? Like, really, you need to think that through. And a good buyer's agent will also help you think that through. Hang on, those bedrooms are small. Your kids are going to grow up, and in 4 or 5 years, those bedrooms aren't going to work for you, right? That sort of stuff. So making sure you're buying the right home that's really a good fit for you, that where the location is not going to ultimately make you go, oh my goodness, why do we move here? This is just too hard getting the kids to the schools through the bloody railway line that's always shut, all that sort of stuff. But also financially, right? The difference between your next home being one that might help you rebuild your financial position surprisingly quickly versus one that's going to go absolutely nowhere for you and just kind of not really be back on the property ladder, just be treading water. So you can find a lovely home at any price point that is a place that you can feel warm about, and that's going to be a good base for your family. So don't feel that when you're moving down in price point, that means you can no longer have somewhere you can be happy. You will. Just take the time. And And when you get immersed at any price point, you'll find good properties and bad properties.
What about grey divorce? We've seen a big uptick in grey divorce. So people separating after post-50, often initiated by women, the stats tell us. How might this impact real estate decisions at that period of life, at that stage of life?
It actually seems to be, I mean, from my experience, it seems to have been more of a mutual decision sometimes, and both parties seem to be, they both agree that maybe this is their time to separate, and they both tend to be on board. I mean, I've helped lots of clients when we're all speaking together on the phone and I'm speaking to both parties and we're sort of coordinating the next steps to sale of the home. That's been my experience. They seem to be both on board and an amicable decision. So it hasn't seemed to be too much of an issue from my experience.
But there'd be different considerations because you've both talked about, being in close proximity to schools and things. And in a grey divorce, the school situation's moot. There's just a lot of different considerations that someone in their 50s or 60s will be thinking about when they are leaving a long-term relationship and considering their real estate options.
A lot of people are at the time in life when they were considering downsizing anyway. There's multiple motivations for downsizing. One is, hey, we no longer need 5-bedroom, 3-bath and this big garden. But also, actually they're looking at the equity that's sitting in their home going, gosh, we could actually get access to a few shekels here and have a more enjoyable life having access to some of that equity that's been tied up in our home because we're moving from a $2 million home to a $1 million home or whatever it might be. So that's a motivation for people to downsize often anyway. Now, if it's a grey divorce, that might be bringing on a downsizing decision for both parties and including potentially freeing up some equity for both parties. And that may even be an attraction for people in that process. So you're thinking about that what I would say, putting on my investment lens is this. If you're in a good family home, you've been sitting, though you may not have known it, on what I will call the capital growth train. And it's been steadily progressing you up the wealth stakes while you've been busy doing other things. Most quality family homes double in value every 10 years. Not all of them do, though. A lot of the types of property that you're considering potentially downsizing to may not be on the capital growth train. You may like the idea of this nice inner city apartment with the Miele kitchen and yada, yada, yada. That might feel like a better lifestyle choice for you, and that's fine. A brand new high-rise apartment will almost certainly deliver zero capital growth for you in the next 10 years, whereas staying in the family home would have delivered you a huge amount. But moving to a smaller, say a terrace house or something, you'll still be on the capital growth train. So there are really significant consequences in your next housing decision, including a downsizing decision, because you've been steadily building wealth, whether you know it or not, in most family homes. And you may suddenly not only have less of that because you've separated and you've divided those proceeds, but if your housing decisions at that point then move you into a different type of housing that doesn't have the same capital growth, you've stepped off that wealth creation train, and that's material. So, and I think very few people are really aware of that dynamic, and certainly the people that are selling luxury apartments don't make them any more familiar with it.
So is there a takeaway there, Evan, for you around a standalone property as opposed to an apartment as far as staying on the capital growth train? What are your top 3 tips for staying on the train? Let's
just start with the underlying fundamentals, and I guess this is sort of the gospel according to Longview, but I think any property professional would agree with this. Land appreciates, buildings depreciate, right? And so the more of the value of the property that is in fact the value of the land underneath the property, broadly speaking, the better the capital growth. That doesn't mean that, for example, all apartments have low capital growth. If you're in a small Art Deco apartment in a good location, the value of the land under it is, let's say, 1/4 of the value of the total land divided by the 4 apartments. That can still be 70 or 80% of the value of the property, and that apartment will continue to grow 5, 6, 7% per annum. Terrific. So this is not houses are good, apartments are bad. A new build high-rise apartment, I absolutely categorically guarantee you will never grow in value. Almost never. The Longview data science team's analysed every single sale price of every single property in the country for the last 50 years. So when I say these things definitively, I say them based in deep experience and facts. If you take that simple lens, the properties that grow in value, and as I say, it's not purely about housing type, but what we call Rodwells, robust older dwellings on well-located land. So whether that's an inner city terrace house or an Art Deco apartment or a villa unit, for example, which is a very appropriate form of downsizing, versus a new build high-rise apartment, you'll get much, much stronger capital growth in all of the, as well as obviously a detached home on a block of land, than you will likely in a new high-rise apartment as the counter example.
I just want to follow that through because I've also worked with many clients who have said, I don't think I've now got enough in my half pot post-separation to stay on the capital growth train or to buy something that feels like the kind of place that I want to make home. Yeah. Is there any sense in buying an investment property using some of the insights that you're sharing, Evan, and then renting? So you've still got a foot in the market, but it might not be where you lay your head at night.
Yeah, look, the rentvesting, which is often a piece of advice given to young people who can't afford to buy their first home, but they at least want to. Look, I'm a bit cautious about that strategy for a couple of reasons. If it's possible for you to own a property that has good capital growth, it's infinitely preferable that it's the property that you live in for the simple and obvious reason that if it's not, then you're going to pay a lot of tax on it. The investment performance of the property you buy as a rental property would have to be so much stronger than the capital growth performance of a property you're able to live in that it overcomes all of the tax burdens and other costs that your net returns. So if you could live in an older style apartment that might get 3 or 4% capital growth or 5% capital growth, you still may end up doing better than if you bought a rental property that might do 6 or 7% capital growth, but then you're paying land tax because it's not your principal place of residence. You're paying capital gains tax when you sell it, and you've got all the other costs and hassles and taxes of being a landlord. So I'm not saying it's not possible for the rent vesting strategy to work, but it's always preferable if you're going to own a property with, firstly, that you own property that has good capital growth, and secondly, that you focus first and foremost, wherever possible, on living in the property with good capital growth, because that way it's the only tax-free investment you're ever going to make. So even if it's a smaller home or perhaps an older style apartment or a villa unit or a townhouse, something that's going to get reasonable capital growth versus not is preferable. If you can't do that, then you have to accept, and there may be other reasons. You know, people often, obviously, they want to feel, for example, a single woman wanting to feel she's living in a secure location where she's safe, and you know, that might make it more attractive to be in one of those apartments that is less likely to get capital growth. I mean, obviously, that's the right decision for her, and she should do that. But then recognising that her home is not going to be a source of, and I shouldn't, you know, it could be either of you, but not going to be a source of capital growth, then you might be looking to invest what money you do have in an investment. And whether that's a property investment or a share or other investment, then you just got an investment decision to make, and you can make a decision about whether the right investment decision for you is a property investment or a share or an ETF or other investments. Part of the reason Longview created the Home Equity Fund is that's where people invest to get capital growth returns without having to be a landlord. So that's a separate part of what we do. But if people are in the fortunate position where they've got excess capital coming out of the downsizing and they want to stay on the capital growth train, but the home they're going to live in is not in the capital growth train, then that's what our Home Equity Fund allows them effectively to do.
Okay. And looking ahead, I'll start with you, Jules. What trends do you foresee in how the property market might intersect in this separation divorce space as relationships, you know, that almost 1 in 2 end in divorce? So this is, we're seeing an increase, I guess, in separations. And when we get data actually that suggests that divorce is not on the rise, there's skewed data that's informing why it's not. In other words, people sometimes haven't actually got married in the first place, so we can't count them as a divorce. But the relationship space is changing, and there's going to be a flow-on effect here in the real estate game. What do you think some of those trends might be?
You see commentary every day about how the property market's in a bubble, and it's house price to income ratios are higher than they've ever been, and they're going to come down. Or there was a story going around not long ago that house prices are only up because interest rates are going down, and then once interest rates go up, house prices are going to crash. And we published a white paper saying all of that stuff was nonsense, and it turns out that it was. What drives the housing market is very simple. We have the second highest population growth rate in the world, second highest in the world, and we concentrate our population growth almost entirely into just three major urban centres, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And what that means is very simple. There are more and more people every day who want to live on the same pieces of land in the established suburbs of those cities. And as a consequence, the value of the land underneath these homes has been doubling every 8 years for 100 years. So I'm here to tell you that unless we stop having the second highest population growth rate in the world, or we stop cramming most of that population growth into Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, that the value of the land underneath our homes is going to continue to rise much more rapidly than our incomes or anything else. So that's difficult news to hear, because everyone thinks that if we only change negative gearing policy, suddenly house prices would crash, or if we only built more property, suddenly house prices has crashed. They're not going to, okay? It's not the house, it's the land. And that's almost unique to Australia. We have the second highest population growth rate in the world, but we also have the most level of urban concentration in the world, and it's that combination that leads to our very unique housing market. That's tricky, and in particular, the homes that grow the fastest in value tend to be the ones where the land underneath the home is the bulk of the value. Many of our family homes are in that bucket. Ironically, most people's family home turned out to be a better investment than the investment property they thought they were buying to make money. And that's even before we get to the tax issues I raised earlier. So that's one of the many reasons. I mean, the more important reason, obviously, is just the emotional environment, particularly when there's kids involved. But where we can help someone stay in that home when they might otherwise have had to sell it as part of the divorce process. First and foremost, that often is just the most absolutely stabilising force you can have for the family, and particularly the children, and staying with the support network and the neighbourhood that you know and all of those things. But secondly, that can be a very important part of the financial outcome. Part of the reason, we came to talk to Separation Guide was we were finding that we were meeting an increasing number of clients who are using Longview's HomeFlex, which gives you access to some of your home equity without selling the home or without taking out a mortgage or having any monthly repayments. We're finding people using that to try and find a way to get enough when they've got to pay out a partner. And it's often both partners would actually like one partner to remain in the home with the children, right? That's often what everybody wants. And yet it's hard to get the financial settlement if too much of the marital asset pool is tied up in equity in that home, and therefore the only way to liberate that equity is to sell the home, even if the person who was going to be paid out doesn't want that outcome. We've been able to give access to some of that equity to the partner who's staying in the home. They can then use that as part of the settlement for the partner who's leaving, so that they've got some equity to start looking for their next home for that might be there 4 days a fortnight or whatever it might be. And then sometimes we can also give extra equity to that partner in buying another home.
I mean, it's so useful, I think, to broaden our minds to think about what options there are available, because we're often limited just by knowledge.
Yeah.
And so hearing some of these ideas, I think, will be really useful for a lot of people. Jules, you mentioned things like REA.com before. What else do you think are some of your favourite tools or resources or checklists that people might want to access to make informed decisions?
Yeah, so there's REA, Domain. Even if you just look online and selling a home, you'll get some checkpoints there, just even through Google. RACV site actually has some good links for people who are looking to sell their properties. I guess we are sort of that vendor's advocate that can help when they come to us. That's sort of what we do. I would do that research, and I would answer any of the questions and concerns they have, set up strategies. I guess we're a good tool to use.
What you do.
Yeah, that's what we do, yeah.
Yeah, that's what you do. So where can people find out more, Jules? What's the best way for them to...
Just jump online, Agent Select. unpack.com.au. You can, it'll give you a great insight to who we are and what we do. I guess we're a small team here, but we're independent and we're a neutral team. I mean, that's the best way that I can say. We're really here to get the best outcome for everybody if the decision of the sale of the home is what they've decided. So again, we're not pressure, we're not here to pressure, but if they have decided to sell, then we're here to support them through that every step of the way, ensure that they meet any deadlines, answer any concerns or questions they have. We provide market appraisals for them. We can step through those market appraisals with them. We can compare agents' fees and commissions. We also have the difficult conversations of negotiating the agents' fees and commissions for them, which is fantastic. We can save them, thousands and thousands on the sale of their home. We can also assist with deferring any costs. So any of the costs that they don't want to pay for up front, we can support in deferring that to come out of settlement. We love what we do, and we're just really here to support them through a really difficult emotional time. As I said, be an independent, neutral party for both parties if they have decided that they need to move on in the sale of their home.
Well said. Evan, do you have other resources, checklists, tools that you think?
Yeah, look if at longview.com.au, so property is a long game, so we're Longview. We've got a team of about 120 professionals, and we do everything except selling homes. First and foremost in this situation, if people are wanting to try and stay in the family home, but it's hard to see the math adding up, then potentially Longview's HomeFlex might get them access to some of that capital to help them do that. Or similarly, if they're now needing to buy a new home and they don't have as much equity as they would like, that may be the departing partner, or it could be both partners having sold the home, then Longview's Buying Boost also gives people access to additional equity in exchange for a share of future capital growth. So on either staying in the home or buying a new home, we potentially can be a financial partner there. And if you're buying the new home, then we also help you make sure you buy the right home. So our buyers advisors help you make sure you've thought through your needs and then can assess the homes that you're looking at and then negotiate the purchase for you, like any good professional buying advisor does. And even sometimes people choose to rent out the home for some reason or have that. Obviously, our property management team can do that as well. And for those who are fortunate enough to be downsizing, liberating a pile of money and need to invest it somewhere, and have stepped off the capital growth train in particular, then our home equity fund allows them to stay on the capital growth train without having to live in it, and still without having to pay land tax, because we're co-investing with homeowners. No one's paying any land tax. So that's a wide range of options at Longview, but the one I was most concerned about was to make sure people were aware of HomeFlex, because if that can make the difference between being able to stay in the family home and not, that's a huge opportunity. If we can help with that, we'd be really pleased to do so.
Thank you both. I think you both bring a very informed, supportive, empathetic and steady hand to this conversation, which we know for so many people can feel, overwhelming and often out of our wheelhouse, I think. It's not unusual for people to say, I don't know, I've never bought or sold except this one family home. I've never invested or rented.
A couple of times in your life, right? I mean, Jules does this for a living. Right. Our buying advisors do this. Our buying advisors have literally bought 1,000 homes. Right, they've been through that mill 1,000 times. Jules will have been through the sale process thousands of times. So I think on the opposite, some people think it's more in their wheelhouse than it is. Often professional people who are very able in their professional life and might even consider themselves to be quite commercial. I often see people trying to negotiate with a real estate agent thinking they're the first person who ever thought of having an exploding offer or, all sorts of stuff. And the agents just quietly roll their eyes and go, oh, yeah, another person who thinks they know what they're doing. Property and transactions in property, like anything else in life, you get better at it the more you do. And if you do it thousands of times, you're much less likely to make a mistake. And that's why at this time of all times, it's a good time to get professional advice.
Yeah. Thank you both. I think there's a lot of practical, tangible tips that you have both shared. There's some new ways to think. There's a lot of tools and resources, but perhaps above all, there's a sense of reassurance that there are people, including those at Longview and Agent Select, that can help guide this process. And why would we try and do something outside of our wheelhouse at any stage in our life, but particularly at a time when we're feeling emotionally and therefore cognitively overwhelmed. So thank you both for your time. Lots to take away there and lots to digest, but there's quite a high level of hope in what you've both discussed today.
Thanks, Sabina.
Thanks, Sabina.
At the Separation Guide, we measure our success by our ability to keep you out of conflict and get through separation in the best possible way, protecting your long-term health, wealth, and happiness. The Separation Guide plan provides you with step-by-step guidance on all stages of separation and aims to empower you with the knowledge, expert resources, skills, and strategies to take each step with confidence. Every specialist attached to our platform is measured on their ability to do the same, and everyone signs an ethical charter showing we all believe that court should be seen as a last resort. If you'd like to learn more about your options in separation or you want to be put in touch with professionals to guide you through, please go to theseparationguide.com.au and complete our 3-minute interactive Q&A, or check out our other podcasts and blogs. If you found the information today useful, please subscribe, share and leave us a review. It's a great way to help our podcast reach others going through separation. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Separation Guide acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.